This is some really terrible and some sad news. It's data that was actually just released recently by the CDC with demographic breakdown as well. And unfortunately, just really kind of continues a trend that we saw after COVID. So let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. We have the full chart here. Overall, the number of deaths by suicide here in the United States actually increased 2.6% from 2021 to 2022. They have an overall demographic breakdown here, and some of the trends are some things that we've been trying to highlight on the show now for quite some time. As you can see, the number of male suicides stood at some 39,255 in the year 2022 in the United States. Female suicide also increased, actually even more so at a higher rate, from 9,800 to 10,194. When you look at the overall breakdown by race, you can see that Native and African, American Indian and Alaskan Natives, there was a slight decrease in the overall rate. The thing is, though, is that the numbers there are different. They're so low in some respect that whenever you do see changes, that it will reflect differently in terms of the overall statistics. I think the important thing was to actually look at the age demographic and at some of the really troubling trends that we're beginning to see. So luckily, I guess, the 10 to 24 year suicide rate went down by 8.4%. There is still some analysis about happening with young girls, young men, social media and all that. That's a whole other discourse that we can step away from. The problem that you're really seeing here is that from 45 to 64 years, there was a 6.6% increase in the suicide rate. But over 65, there was a 8.1% increase in the suicide rate, Krystal. That is particularly troubling and underscores a lot of issues around. Look, we talk a lot about boomers here on the show, about boomer wealth, about how in many respects the luckiest generation that set us all up for failure. But we also don't forget, and I was just looking at some retirement data just yesterday, over 50% of people don't have a single dollar in retirement saved. A lot of old people are in a real bad situation. They are a blown tire away from bankruptcy, and they literally only have a Social Security check to rely on. And in many respects, that is not enough in order to make rent, make food. There's a loneliness crisis as well that has hit. There's also a big generational question around people who are elderly and whether their relatives should care for them or they're going to just dump them in a home. And unfortunately,
so
if you look at the discourse and all that, I think a lot of that is reflected in that over 65 number. And one of the reasons why you should always care about the suicide rate, especially whenever it goes up, is, Andrew Yang said this during his campaign. I still think it's one of the most profound things he ever said. The most basic reflection of a society doing well or not is, are people living or are people dying? And we have a lot of deaths right now. We have massive deaths of despair. Suicide rate is just part of that. Drug overdose and all that also went up in 2022 to basically an entire Vietnam War of people killed. One of the number one causes of death, accidental cause of death now, is no longer car accidents for younger people. It's actually drug overdose, specifically by fentanyl. So these are all deeply interconnected around what we see, and it is a deepening sign of overall sickness. Increases in the suicide rate now over the last several years are something that we are really beginning to see is an overall trend. And if you do need help, please seek it from a friend, call the suicide hotline or any of that, because it's just it is a sign of deep sickness that we can see here.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to lay out some of the additional numbers of who is most impacted. Both men and women saw an increase in the suicide rate year over year, but men continue to make up 4 times the rate of women in terms of suicide. So men are 50% of the population, but nearly 80% of suicides. And to dig even more into the age numbers, the highest rate of suicide comes among those age 85 plus. So Saagar, speaking to what you were saying about, people who are towards the end of their life, who are worried about being put in homes, who don't have quality of life, whatever is going on there is deeply tragic that our elders, to that large extent, feel that they are no longer wanted, needed, et cetera, in this world. The third highest rate is actually among those aged 25 to 34. So people who are kind of, coming into their prime earning years, who are, these are millennials and Gen Z who may be struggling with, not being able to find purpose in life, not being able to get the kind of job that's going to give them any kind of stability. All those sorts of things play into this. One thing that I found remarkable is actually in 2020, there was a significant dip in the suicide rate, and then post-pandemic is when it has really spiked. And listen, there's a lot of ways we could speculate about why that may be the case. But, we were looking at, we're probably going to cover for this weekend, numbers of homelessness. That also dramatically declined during the pandemic because of some of the government supports that were put in place. So I wonder if some of those government financial supports that were in place during the pandemic didn't also help to curb the suicide rate, because we know
that's possible.
We know when people are under severe economic stress is one of the times men in particular are more likely to commit suicide.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing I really found whenever I went deep into guns, because everyone's always like, oh, mass shootings. I've talked about this before. And I was like, okay, well, what is a mass shooting? Like, what does that even mean? The way that you and I would understand it is like a school shooter. That's incredibly rare. Mass shooting is defined by the feds is 3 or more people who are killed. They dropped it down from 4. So I'm like, okay, what are these incidents? Gang violence, that's overwhelming. Let's put that aside. You know what the rest were? I was telling you this. It's guys who kill themselves and they kill their whole families. And the majority of the reason, almost every time, they're in crazy amount of debt. A lot of these gamblers, people who didn't want to tell their wife, they can't live with the shame of being able to provide. They get twisted in their own heads and they think it's some sort of like weird altruistic move that they're doing by killing themselves and their whole families and departing it. Sounds sick, I know, but this is you got to try and understand the mindset of a deranged person who's in that state of affairs, but that is directly downstream. So I think you can understand then 2021 and 2022 as you start to see some of the economic real issues that happen with COVID. We've also looked at this previously. Anytime somebody says like, oh, I wish we had a recession, or we just need a nice little recession. Do you know how many people killed themselves in 2008? That's one of those where everybody always moves past it. It's not just people lost their homes. A lot of people killed themselves in 2009 and in 2010 as a result of just being like, I got no way out, I got no chance to live. It's either the street or it's this, and they choose that. And it's a terrible situation that we find ourselves in here. And this is just one of the most stark, flashing red lights. I just don't know when people are going to start paying attention. We've had almost 5-6 years of life expectancy drop.
Yeah.
We're the worst life expectancy drop in the United States since freaking World War I, over 100 years. And everyone's like, oh, it's just COVID. If you look deeper, it's not. COVID it's part of the story. Massive portion of the story. Deaths of despair, suicide. And when you really look at this by income spectrum, especially the people who commit suicide, and you also look at attempts and the reasons behind that, same pair with drug overdose, we have I don't know. It's sickness. It's one of those mass societal issues that everybody pretends to care about, but nobody's actually doing anything about.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, I know. When you look at the chart of the trend over years, it really starts to track upward right around the time of the financial crisis. Actually, a little bit before that, a couple years before that. And it basically continues on an upward trajectory, unimpeded, with the exception of during the pandemic, which again, I think is really noteworthy. But it does speak to something that is deeply, deeply wrong at the core of our society. And when you put all of these things together, it is a dire picture that we seem to not have the political will or desire to really deal with. I mean, I will remember that Senator Sanders actually convened like a whole hearing on the death rate and decreased life expectancy, et cetera. And Preston covered it all. I mean, barely any attention to what should be one of the gravest problems in society. So we'll certainly continue to keep an eye on it and, bring awareness to it and try to figure out what the solutions are. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.